Natasha visited the cemetery for the first time when she was 7 years old. Her great-grandparents were buried there. Her parents were cleaning up around the graves, and the girl stood there with her mouth hanging open. Everything seemed strange and scary to her. There was a grave not far away, with candy and cookies on it. Why, after all, the dead don't eat. Mom and Dad finished and put candy on the graves too. Natasha asked, "Why do the dead have candy?" "That's the way it's supposed to be," Mom answered. "We need to show our great-grandparents that we love them and care about them. And also," Dad continued, "there's a little hungry girl wandering around here somewhere. She was born into a very poor family and has never eaten anything sweet in her life. She ran away from home and took up residence in the cemetery. At night she comes out of her hiding place and eats the candy and cookies she finds in the cemetery." "Don't talk nonsense," said Mother. "There is no hungry girl. It's all a fairy tale. Petrovich works for us. He said that he saw the hungry girl with his own eyes when he stayed late at the cemetery. He has a lot of relatives buried here," Mama argued with Papa, and Natasha thought, really? Are there such children who have never eaten sweets in their lives? Then it is clear why this hungry girl settled in the cemetery. They also came to a grave. There on the gravestone hung a portrait of a girl of 3 or 4. The girl was smiling merrily. She had 2 ponytails hanging on her sides. The girl's face seemed familiar. "Mama, what kind of a girl is she?" But my mother was crying for some reason. And Daddy was crying, too. They didn't say anything. Natasha wanted to read what was written on the monument. But unfortunately she couldn't read. She didn't go to school yet, and her mom and dad never taught her. They tried once when she was 4. But then something happened and they stopped. From the bag her parents took out a big basket of candy. "Wow, Natasha's favorite. Can I have one?" "You can, of course," said Mom. "Take all of them," said Daddy. "No, I'd rather save the candy for hungry girl." Natasha changed her mind about eating the candy. "Let's go outside." They reached the gate. Her parents went through it, but Natasha couldn't. It's like an invisible wall is holding her back. "Mom, I can't go through." "Bye, Natasha," the parents said and went to the car. Natasha saw them get into the car and drive away. Fear gripped her. She ran along the fence. She wanted to get out, but the cemetery wouldn't let her go. And then Natasha remembered that she was the hungry girl. She was born with diabetes. She wasn't allowed anything sweet at all. But once for March 8th, her mother was given several big boxes of sweets. Her mother hid them from Natasha on the tall cupboard. But Natasha took a long stick and threw the candy on the floor. After eating the candy, she died. And now, when Mom and Dad come to the cemetery, it seems for a while that she is a regular girl, not a ghost. Her parents loved her very much, so they hear her voice. I was sitting on duty when my cell phone rang. It was my wife. It was strange. At this hour she usually sleeps with the kids. It was close to 2 o'clock in the morning. On the phone a frightened Natasha in a whisper, through sobs, asked me to urgently come home. Because the twins behave, to put it mildly, inadequately. The kids are 6 years old. She was unable to explain what was going on. But she just started crying harder. I had to get off work, beg my shift supervisor to cover for me, and chase me in the middle of the night to the other end of the city. Natasha was welcomed in the entrance hall in a robe and barefoot. She sobbed and threw herself by the neck and barely agreed to come into the apartment, on demand, to explain what was going on. She burst into tears and started pointing her finger toward the children's room. I went to the kids' room. She wouldn't follow me. The children were in the room. They were happy to see me. But when I asked what happened, they also didn't answer anything intelligible. They just said that Mom was frightened by an old woman who climbed out the window. I asked what kind of grandmother she was and why my mother was afraid of her. My son said that Mom came in and didn't say hello to her grandmother, and we wanted to introduce them. And she held out her hand to Mom, and she ran away. And where is the old woman now? I asked in bewilderment. Over there, right above you. Dad, how funny you are. Lift your head, she will say hello to you. I looked up, not knowing what I was doing. There was a shadow on the ceiling. I quickly realized that there was no place for it to come from. I grabbed the children and, on the verge of hysterics, ran out of the apartment. My wife jumped out after me, and we drove in the middle of the night to my parents' house. Natasha still hasn't told me what happened that night, but she refused to go home until the priest was brought in. The children still remind us that we had hurt her grandmother, and she was funny. She could even run up and down walls. The girl was playing in her room when she heard her mother calling to her from the kitchen. The girl ran into the kitchen, as she ran down the hallway near the stairs. The closet door opened and someone's hands clamped over her mouth and pulled her inside. It was her mother. She whispered, "Don't go in the kitchen." I heard it too. "It's late. We should take a shortcut," I thought, and turned left, trying desperately to see the road through the wall of rain in the pitch darkness. I had never taken this route to the village before, though it was much shorter than usual. The thing is, every time I left my grandmother's house, she would implore me not to take the shortcut, but she would not explain why. So far I had obeyed the strict injunction, but now it had been broken. I felt uncomfortable, but I forced myself to pull myself together. 20 minutes into the drive, there was still no village in sight, though by my calculations I should have arrived 10 minutes ago. There were no houses, no people. Just a black abyss ahead of me. The light from the headlights cut through the darkness no more than a few yards. Nervous, I took the navigator out of my bag and looked where I was. It turned out to be another 2 kilometers to the village. Determined to check the speedometer on arrival for accuracy, I drove on. But 10 minutes later the picture in the window remained the same. A black veil behind the rain and nothing but that. I took out the navigator again, because I thought I was lost. But when I looked at it, I was horrified. The GPS showed that I hadn't moved a meter and the distance to the village was still the same 2 kilometers. I thought the gadget was broken, but after turning it in my hands I understood that it was working properly, because it showed the right direction. Fear began to creep into my soul when I remembered my grandmother's warning about not taking shortcuts. But I decided to keep driving and at all costs to get out of this strange place. I had been driving for about an hour. The navigator stubbornly stood at 2.01 kilometers to destination and didn't move an inch. It was getting cold. The rain was turning into a downpour. Suddenly I hit the brakes hard and banged my head on the steering wheel. "They're crazy," I shouted angrily and jumped out of the car. After walking a few paces, however, I realized that there was no one in front of the car, although I had definitely seen a group of people nearly run over a few seconds before crossing the road. After standing there for a minute, I finally realized that I was hallucinating and ran to the car. I continued to drive forward, trying not to look in the mirrors. As the hour and a half passed after the turn at the fork, I began to realize that it was all pointless. The dot on the navigator remained in place. No signs of the village. Lights from the windows, street lights, people, houses, buildings were visible outside the window. I stubbornly continued to drive into the abyss of darkness, slowly losing hope of getting out of here. There was still half an hour's worth of gasoline left. What would happen when it ran out? I was afraid to imagine. I was driving, and all of a sudden I noticed some movement in the rear mirror. I looked more closely. It was the people who had nearly been run over by me. At first I wanted to stop and already pressed the brake pedal, as suddenly I felt cold. How could it be that the car was moving at a speed of 40 kilometers per hour and the people running after it? Looking more closely, I saw that they were not running at all, but gliding over the ground. Mad with fear, I pressed the gas to the floor, wishing only one thing, to get away from the pursuers. I glanced in the mirror. They had almost caught up with me. A couple of meters more, and we'll touch the car, and this did not bode well. 80 kilometers per hour, 90 kilometers per hour, 100 kilometers per hour. I looked back. They were gone. Whew, I exhaled with relief. Got away. Then another good news awaited me. The point on the navigator had finally moved and now showed 1.5 kilometers to my destination. I looked ahead. In the distance there was a small dot from our nice lantern, located near the gate. The darkness somehow became less overwhelming all at once, and in a couple of minutes I was at my grandmother's house. I still wondered what had happened that night. What was it? Did I fall into some kind of space-time hole? Who were these creatures, gliding over the ground, and why did they want to catch up with me? The answer was left there, on the short road. 2 years ago I lost my husband, whom I loved very much. He was the man who was everything to me. We were married 3 years ago. We had a beautiful family, and it was like living in heaven. April 15th, 2009. That day just turned my life upside down and into a living hell. That was the day my husband died. His heart stopped at work. After my husband's funeral I could not sleep, and if I did manage to get a 10-minute nap, my husband would immediately appear in my dreams and ask me to go to his grave and dig him up. This went on for 3 days. I told my dream to his parents, and we decided that if their son didn't like lying there, then it was a bad place. We decided to rebury my husband. While we found people who are engaged in this, while collected all the necessary certificates. A month has passed. On May 17, 2009, they dug out the coffin with my husband. When they opened it, I fainted. The top and side lid of the coffin was scratched by my husband's fingernails. We buried him alive. As the doctors further ruled, my husband was in a lethargic sleep. He woke up already buried in the ground. I heard this story from the conductor on a bus in my town. Arsenyev is a very small town, but you could hardly call it quiet. They find dismembered corpses near garages, or children's heads wrapped in bags in vegetable gardens in general. We have enough crazy people here. One evening the Arsenyev and Yukino bus left for its last trip. There were a lot of passengers. Several people rode standing up. One of these people was a woman who suddenly felt sick and started asking the driver to stop the bus. But there was only a forest around, and the driver asked her to wait a little longer. Then the woman started screaming and demanding to stop just now. The driver pulled over and opened the doors. The woman ran into the woods. A few minutes later, two people showed up from the woods, the same woman holding the hand of a crying girl who, stammering, said that her mother had brought her into the forest, put her on a high tree branch and put a noose around her neck, saying, "Sit here for a while, and when you get tired of it, just jump down." "Mommy," said the girl, "but this rope is pressing on my throat." "That's all right, my daughter. It won't hurt when you jump down." The passengers were shocked, as the woman reported that she suddenly felt a strong anxiety and that is why she asked to stop. When she ran to a small clearing, the girl was about to jump. There was a blue streak on the child's neck and the child was coughing. It was decided to take the little girl to the hospital. After driving a few more meters, the driver stopped to pick up the voting woman. When she got on the bus, she was greeted by a child's question. "Mommy, you said it wouldn't hurt, didn't you?"